So hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels podcast. This week we're joined by our Executive Director, Frank Verredi.
Hi there, nice.
And we're also really delighted to welcome Tom Vandendriessche, MEP.
Nice being here.
Yeah, great. We've got a lot to discuss this week. It's been another busy one in European affairs. We're going to take a look at the opening of a new court case at the ECJ against Hungary. We're going to also take a look at the farmers' protests, which are continuing both in Europe, but also it seems expanding into the UK. And we're also going to digest the news of further escalation in Ukraine. But before we get on to that, with Tom here, we thought we had to mention the fact that the kind of armed wing of the cordon sanitaire, Antifa, here in Brussels had another exciting day out where not only were they very angry about the book launch of Jordan Bardella, but also they took the opportunity to come over to your HQ, Tom, and try and cause some damage. What happened and what do you make of this kind of thuggery on the streets of Brussels?
Well, it's not the first time this happens. Approximately every 3 months, our headquarters get attacked by these Antifa gangs, which are, by the way, subsidized by the political system and protected by the judiciary and the police system. And they're basically there to attack the opposition. So it's very good that it got exposed and that the whole world has seen what the state of affairs in the super democracy Belgium, where Verhofstadt was once prime minister. So lecturing other countries is not the best position for Belgian political system, I think.
Yeah, Frank, we had our own run-in with the Antifa before, and you kind of noted that they're very much there's a kind of symbiotic relationship with the mainstream party and with the state bureaucracy. What do you think?
Well, I think Antifa is used by the state to, first of all, make a point, and at the same time, the police can say, well, unless you not have this meeting, unless you close down this discussion, there'll be a big security problem. So they're using Antifa as a weapon to, in a sense, to teach the right to conservatives a lesson. And I think it's very dangerous, the way in which Antifa has become part of the system. This is a really important point, because everybody thinks that Antifa is independent organizations outside of the system. But actually they're quite integrated into the Belgian political class. And they are really the kind of the thugger element of that class. And in that sense, even though they're meant to be anti-fascist, they behave more like fascists than any other organization in Belgium.
If I may add one more element to this, is that it's actually the League of Human Rights who is behind all these Antifa riots. So you cannot make this up.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, one of the topics that was leading the news this week was the announcement of more court cases against Hungary. In this case, at the ECJ, they were taking Hungary to court over an education and sexuality law that it had passed. And what was notable about this, and obviously we're no stranger to Hungary being the bête noire of Brussels politics, but what was remarkable about this was the number of governments that had joined the case that's put forward by the Commission. Frank, what does this case represent in the kind of escalating war against Hungary?
Well, I think what it means is that for these governments that kind of got together to gang up on Hungary, from their point of view, if Hungary didn't exist, you have to invent it. Because it's almost like they need this evil target who they can really lash out against. And the tragic thing is that actually these governments have got no business telling Hungarian governments and Hungarian people what they should and shouldn't be teaching in their schools. That is something that is, by every single law that's around, a domestic prerogative rather than something that the Brussels or the EU should be dictating about. So for me, this is a really foundational question of sovereignty more than anything else, because it's not just about LGBTQ teaching, not about the schools, it's also about whether or not a nation has got the right to independently decide how it transmits knowledge to the younger generations.
Tom?
No, absolutely. I completely agree. It's a national competence education. We go to the ballot box. We elect politicians in our national democracies. They determine policies in regard to, for example, sexual education or any other field. So it's a democratically legitimized policy. I believe in Hungary there was also a referendum on this topic even. So or in parliament is only one voice voted against the proposition. So there basically is a very large democratic as I say, a foundation for this kind of policy. So what are these other countries mingling in Hungarian affairs? And what worries me the most is that Hungary is a nation of 10 million inhabitants, so it's not the largest nation in Europe. I always thought that the European cooperation was about having respect for one another and the unity in diversity principle and the subsidiarity principle, where you have policies at the lowest possible political level. Well, it appears to me that the European Union is turning into something that we never signed up for. It's about bullying smaller nations. It's about political intimidation, political and financial blackmail towards countries who choose freely to have other kind of policies. And I just think we cannot accept that. And we must draw a red line here. It's not basically about education or LGBT gender ideology in Hungary. It's about the freedom of nations to determine their own fate.
Yeah, this is very true. We've noted before on the podcast, Frank, the kind of way in which the ECJ has very much been transformed into a directly political court, but especially pushing some of the kind of pet causes of the EU elite around sexuality and gender and things. And what can we expect from this case going forward? Some people have suggested that, I mean, this is an Article 2 procedure, so this is really, really serious. And some people, that you can hear them salivating in Brussels that they might try and kind of strip Hungary of all of its voting rights and basically leave Hungary defenseless against further encroachment by the EU.
I think there's a very powerful impulse to move in that direction. And certainly some of the left-wing MEPs are determined to downsize Hungary into this third-rate nation with very little power and influence. But I really don't think that that's going to happen. I think that the consequence of actually taking away Hungary's right to vote would be so overwhelming, would have such a major sort of almost like kind of traumatic influence on the way that the Brussels institutions are run, that I don't think that the moment has arrived there. But having said that, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that these kinds of attacks on Hungary or any sovereigntist nation are going to escalate, because what I see happening in front of my eyes is a very powerful federalist drive that is trying to influence and take over more and more of the national prerogatives and trying to limit the scope that national governments have for making decisions. So this is a really important step, and we have got to understand that the ECJ is not like a real court. It's not about justice. It's almost like a political tribunal where power plays amongst different nations have the last say.
Yeah, Tom, the rule of law is obviously super important as a democratic principle, but it seems increasingly that the ECJ is involved in either legalism or rule by law, or just simply making the law up as it likes in a particular moment.
Absolutely, not only in the field of this gender ideology and education in this example, but also on migration policies, for example. Everything is human rights. There's no citizens' rights. I always thought that there are citizens' rights who come first, and human rights is a guiding ethical principle. But we basically see is that democracy is getting replaced by aristocracy, where unelected judges basically make out what kind of policies they have, and democracy has no say in it.
And just to add to that, I've come to the conclusion that the people that are in the ECJ, the so-called judges, are actually political operators. They behave much more like politicians, rather than as independent judges who are balancing the law and weighing up the evidence. And it seems to me that at some point we need to ask some very important questions whether or not the ECJ has got a positive role to play, because at the moment it's entirely a political appendage of the oligarchy that dominates Brussels, rather than having a counterbalance or an independent force.
It's a technostructure which runs the show, basically. And I completely agree. There's no connection to what the judges are determining how they interpret laws, because it's all about interpreting laws. And but there's no connection to what a civil society wants from these judges, which you have in a national judicial system. You have, because the people are living in this society, are coming from this society. So, well, basically our fight, and the Patriots' fight, is the fight for the restoration of democracy and the power to the people.
So the farmers' protests, which we've followed really closely here at MCC Brussels, and they've been a feature of Brussels Life for a little while now, seem to be both maybe intensifying a bit in Europe with the imminent signing of the Mercosur agreement, but also spreading. And so in the UK, we've seen something unprecedented for the UK, which is a farmers' protest in Westminster. Tom, it's been a huge part of Flemish politics, the farmer protests. Tom, what should the UK farmers take from the experience of farmers in Flanders and in Europe more broadly?
Well, farmers are in general not political activists. They're very pragmatic people, practical people. They are not busy with the theories and bureaucracies. For these people to get out on the streets and leave their farms behind, it means a thing. And for society as a whole, looking at it from a higher level, higher perspective, I think that we need to re-evaluate what farming means to our society. In my opinion, it's a strategic sector. In times of crisis, you need energy, you need food, and you need weapon supply, basically, which is what we see in conflicts in Ukraine, for example. So if we have been neglecting this, and the naive idea of the EU elite that liberal globalism would win and we will all become democracies and by having free trade, well, we see that on multiple levels it just doesn't add up. China hasn't become a democracy. It's on the verge of becoming the first economic power in the world. We don't see that the spreading of human rights, let's say, across the globe, and we don't see any fair trade. We see an imbalanced trade, which is very bad for our farmers, for other industries, and I just think we need to rebalance the whole idea. And when farmers come in the streets, for me, it's like an alarm bell ringing about what is happening in the deep structures of society.
Yeah, Frank, we've talked before that the farmers are often, or at the moment, seem to be very much the vanguard of a populist movement more broadly. Is this a similar thing playing out in the UK?
In a funny kind of a way, yes, because everybody was surprised what a large impact the farmers were able to make in the course of their protest. And they were particularly surprised by the amount of public sympathy for them. And everywhere from Germany to France to Flanders, their cause is a very popular one with the population. And the same thing is also evident in Britain. I mean, I was really surprised by the swiftness with which the farmers' protest there has completely put the government on the defensive, and I think they made a very big mistake, probably the biggest mistake of their short reign in power, because they imagined that the farmers are just a bunch of few people and they can more or less kick them around, but that hasn't really happened. So for me this is very important. It's also important because I think Europe needs a rural community, not just in order to provide us with food, but in historically, the rural community is the backbone of society. They are very traditional, or more traditional than the rest of us. And the very fact that they exist provides society with a ballast, a kind of sense of permanence that it needs. They remind us of where we come from in many respects. And that's why a lot of anti-conservatives don't particularly like them, because they aren't particularly woke, they aren't particularly trendy. They're just nice, decent people who get on with life.
Yeah. Tom,
even more, if you look at the history of Marxist regimes, they have always attacked farmers, always, because they are so attached to their culture, to their ground, to their habits, to their traditions, and so on. So they don't believe in revolutions. So, in my opinion, it's no coincidence that multiple governments are tackling the farmers all across Europe.
One of the commentators in the UK, and really echoing something we've seen a lot in Europe, was saying, well, if maybe these farmers just sell their farms and go away, as if there was nothing kind of valuable in having food supplies. This is the attitude of the EU elite as well, isn't it, Tom?
Well, the Greens, Volkswagen is now closing their factories for the first time in 80 years in Germany. This has never happened before due to the Green Deal and the climate madness. Well, basically the Greens are saying, well, why don't we buy Chinese cars? What could possibly happen if we outsource our entire industry to China? It's they're just not in touch with reality.
Yeah, I think also a lot of our elites are deterritorialized. They feel much more comfortable with talking to elites in other countries than with their own people. And that's why they don't understand the importance of space and territory that is essential for the farming community. So they imagine that you just get rid of this whole rural sector and maybe bring in big American companies or Chinese battery makers. But they don't realize that that just changes who you are. It changes the meaning of what it means to be part of a nation. And I think that's why it's so important for us to support the farmers and really popularize their cause.
Mm-hmm. This is basically the idea of a community, belonging to a community, whether it's a national community or at a local community. And this conflicts with this globalist model where the elites detach themselves from the rest of society. It's some kind of neo-feudal system, basically. So I completely agree with you, Frank.
Yeah. It's a high-tech feudalism, in a sense, yeah.
My message for the farmers in Great Britain is I understand it correctly that basically the government is imposing an inheritance tax where from 20%, while the profits from a normal farm is like 1 or 2% per annum. So it's confiscation of property. This is something that is so disturbing to people that I understand completely why they're in the streets. And they should remain in the streets because we have shown here in Flanders how they can put pressure on the political system. Even if there's only 1 or 2 or 3% of the people in the workforce involved in the farming business, nevertheless it has a significance which is much larger. And as Frank said, a lot of people are supporting the farmers for more than their economic purpose. Yeah. It's a way of life.
So much of the news in Brussels and elsewhere has been dominated by a story that the US has lifted restrictions on Ukraine using long-range weapons to make strikes inside Russian territory. Overnight, it seems there was a kind of demonstration of part of Russia's response by what looks like a significant missile strike. Some say a ICBM launched in Ukraine, which would be the first time that kind of a weapon has been used. Frank, we're hot off a conference where we just dug into some of these themes about geopolitics, and a few people were making the point that there's a real lack of geopolitical maturity in the decisions that are being made. You might support or disagree with the decision of Biden, but it seems that it's not based on a serious geopolitical calculation.
I think so. I think what's really disturbing is that Biden took the decision not because something happened, something important happened that he had to respond to, but basically to tie the hands of Donald Trump so that when he becomes president, he's confronted with a new reality where the war has escalated. So basically what Biden has done is just simply escalated the war without necessarily doing Ukraine any good. So it's not as if somehow Ukraine's position has become strengthened, but at the same time has really provoked Russia and made Russia feel even more insecure than it was beforehand. And for me, I'm disturbed by two important things. The first thing that I find disturbing is this immature way in which the Americans are conducting their proxy war in the Ukraine and not really thinking about the consequences. And I'm really scared about the potential for escalation now. And I just hope that things do die down after a while. But what I'm also very disturbed by is the very naive and immature way that the European nations, particularly Britain, France, Germany, are just more or less following what the Americans do. So, there's nothing wrong with, with a united Western response, but that's not the same as America saying, well, we decided yesterday to allow the Ukrainians to use our weapons. It's more than that. What they are really saying is, we've taken a decision and you better follow us. And that's what I find sad, that there is no pretense of an independent foreign policy on the part of European nations. And that's very scary because it means that Europe just lacks the ability to think about its own interests, which is often not the same as that of the United States or any other part of the world.
Mm.
Yeah, Tom, you noted that, weapon supply and other things are crucial parts of kind of national competence and the rest of it, but the world is getting more dangerous, more unpredictable. It seems that there is a real gap in thinking and talking about what is Europe's interest in all of this?
Well, the European Commission doesn't have any clue how to deal with this kind of geopolitical and military topics. This was clear from the beginning. when this horrible war broke out, and there's no doubt who is the aggressor here, it's Russia, in my opinion. But when the war broke out, it was like all these bureaucrats coming out of their offices and declaring that with sanctions they would stop the war. Well, we are now 3 years further, 500,000 deaths or something like that. We started the war with delivering helmets and anti-tank missiles, and now we are sending missiles to attack inside of Russia. We are climbing the escalation ladder, and my main question is, what is the strategy here? What is a strategic goal? And if we see what von der Leyen says about this, all of the time, and this week also in Parliament, we must stand with Ukraine no matter what it takes, but no matter what it takes. What does that mean, actually? There are fundamentals. Ukraine has 4.5 times, the population is 4.5 times smaller than those of Russia, and the industry is 10 times smaller. So giving weapons and euros and harboring real war refugees doesn't change the fate for Ukraine. So this is a very cynical game, in my opinion, where certain forces, especially in the neocon United States, are conducting this war and not to the benefit of European nations, and especially not to the benefit of Ukraine. So I just hope that common sense will return. And I'm very looking forward to what kind of initiative the next administration in the United States will take, so that some kind of peace settlement, at least temporary, can be arranged, because there are nobody benefits from this, and especially not the Ukrainians, of course.
And Frank, I mean, even if some people might be more sympathetic to Trump, the fact that we're waiting on Trump to kind of deliver the verdict as to what the European policy might be speaks to that gap that you're talking about, how little sense of a European interest there is.
I think so. And I think if anybody expects Trump to do Europe any favors, then they're going to be disappointed, because Trump is a realist, and his primary concern is America's national interest, quite rightly, because he's the president of the United States, and that national interest may converge with that of Europe now and again, but not always. And it seems to me that at the moment what has happened is that Biden has created this real mess. It is a real mess, which Trump will probably not want to deal with very much. So this mess that Biden has created will have to be sorted out by Europe, by the Germans, by the French, by, well, all of us in a sense. We're going to pay the price for what Biden did, because one way or the other, the situation cannot just escalate indefinitely. I think most people realize in government that if it continues to escalate the way it is going at the moment, then the war will invariably expand beyond its existing confines. So I think that in many respects, the Trump administration might do some good, but even if it does some good, it will simply expose the fact that Europe is like the little boy that needs Big Daddy to sort out a problem of that magnitude, and that just indicates how irrelevant the European Union has become.
Mm-hmm. But Trump is rightly a politician of the realist approach, but I don't think that the United States has any fundamental interest in a permanent conflict with Russia. I just look at history. What did Nixon do? He separated the USSR and China in the 70s, even when the cultural revolution was going on in China. So it's not about having sympathy for any other country. It's about defending interests. And I do think that the United States have an interest in shutting down the conflict, because their main focus is primarily on the Pacific and China, and second on the Middle East, and only in the third order on Europe. So I just want to express my hope that since the United States is the biggest partner at the table, that with the change of government, also things can change in Europe and in this conflict in particular, because in my opinion the European Union is trapped in its own strategic goals, because von der Leyen said we want to expel every Russian from every inch of Ukrainian territory. And although this might be a very idealistic approach on things, and maybe right so, but you need to put your skin in the game. You need to have the tools to achieve this goal. And the European Union simply does not have these goals. We do not have the weapons production. We do not have the military. We do not have the impact. So we need to find other ways to solve this problem.
Yeah, the European Union leaders were congratulating themselves that they managed to supply Ukraine with 1 million shells. Most of them, almost none of them actually produced in Europe, right? And in that same period, North Korea, supposedly backward country, supplied Russia with more than 5 million shells. So it shows you how far Europe has to go to get serious. And no matter how the war ends, Europe's going to be left in a very sticky situation.
And what's at the root cause of why are we in this mess is the way European politicians or politicians of the European Union are looking at reality. And they apply a liberal, moralist point of view. They want to make the world a better place, but they do not have the tools for it. So if you must do business with everybody in the world in order to achieve some things. And sometimes you must do business with people you don't like. But this is just how it goes.
I think the problem is that we live in a very different world to the one that Tom mentioned when Nixon sorted out the problem and managed to separate China and Russia, because Nixon was fortunate to have someone like Kissinger who had a really good sense of realpolitik, of how to conduct diplomacy like an adult. One of the things that I worry about is that I look around America and the State Department, and I look around the Champs-Élysées in France or the Foreign Office in Britain or Germany, and what you find is that what you have instead are not sort of hard-nosed diplomats, but kind of technocratic social workers who basically imagine that, as you're suggesting, that at the very least they're going to appear to be doing good, even if they're not doing anything that is very valuable. So what I am really concerned about is that we're kind of stuck with a foreign policy elite in Europe that is really unable to do anything effective because they haven't got the intellectual, the practical resources to be able to manage a difficult situation like this. So our concern under those circumstances is very much about the capacity of Europe at the moment, the way it's organized, to be able to be an effective player in the global scene.
Yeah, and the stupidity of von der Leyen, for example. What she said with the election of Donald Trump, we're going to make a bargain with Trump, we will buy more gas from him, which is 2.5 times more expensive. So what is the strategic autonomy, which is one of her primary goals? What is the strategic autonomy of Europe? Becoming more dependent from the United States. And other politicians have also declared we must continue this war by buying more American weapons. Shouldn't we invest in our European defense industry? Just to name it doesn't make any sense.
No, I think they're kind of making it up as they're going along. It's a narrative in search of meaning.
Yeah, well, there's viewers can check out our YouTube channel, especially over the next couple of weeks, where we'll be releasing lots of videos from our recent geopolitics conference, which we touch on in a lot more detail on these topics. Well, thanks so much, Tom, for joining us. Thanks, Frank, as ever. We'll be back with another episode of the MCC Brussels podcast very soon.